I was in a coma for 6 weeks while the doctors told my wife I was going to die. When I woke up, she told me the most fantastic story. My team kept running the business without me. Freelancers reached out to my team and said, "We will do whatever it takes as long as Craig's in the hospital." I consider that the greatest accomplishment in my career. My name is Craig Andrews, and this is the Leaders and Legacies podcast, where we talk to leaders creating an impact beyond themselves. At the end of today's interview, I'll tell you how you can be the next leader featured on this show. If you don't know today's guest, you certainly know at least one of his companies. John built a national brand, and to prove that wasn't mere chance, he built another one in the same exact space. Now, I'll tell you, there are a lot of reasons to clear the distractions and focus on today's show. Personally, I'm looking forward to learning some lessons from this leader who made lightning strike twice. And as you soon hear, it wasn't luck. John charged into the eye of the storm, seized the lightning from the clouds, and hurled it to ground. And didn't happen easily. And in the process, he made over 1,000 millionaires. Today's guest is John Hewitt. You probably know him of Jackson Hewitt Tax Services or Liberty Tax Services. He was born in 1949 in Detroit and has started off on the corporate path with H&R Block, but then at one point decided it was time to branch off and start his own business. And that's when those were the early days that led to Jackson Hewitt. He's a pioneer in the development and use of decision tree tax preparation software, which is now the industry standard. And you'll find out that he led the industry ahead of the IRS, which really poised him for growth. And he's also the author of the book, I Compete: How My Extraordinary Strategy for Winning Can Be Yours. John, welcome to Leaders and Legacies.
Craig, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, it's been interesting as I've been preparing for the interview. I've taken an informal poll of some people I know, and I'll ask, have you heard of Jackson Hewitt Tax Services? And they're like, yeah, of course. And I say, have you heard of Liberty Tax Services? And they're like, yeah, of course. And I've yet to find somebody that didn't know both of those brands. And I know you have more brands than that, but I think that's extraordinary. And I've worked around highly successful people who went off, started a big enterprise, generated, $500 million of wealth for themselves, and then went and started something else. And it never really amounted to much. So I'm really impressed that you did it not just once, but twice, and you're continuing to do it. It's kind of starting with the end in mind. How does somebody do that predictably?
Well, I'm the only one that's founded two of the top 100 retail chains in the country. So there's no one else that can answer that question, right? But both journeys were fun and a learning experience. After I built Jackson Hewitt for 15 years, then if you run something and you build it from nothing and it becomes $1 billion company, Jackson Hewitt became $1 billion company. If in that process you don't learn a lot, you're an idiot, right? So the second time, in a way, was more difficult because I had to compete after my non-compete ran out with Jackson Hewitt. I had to compete with my own name and my own software and my own system and my own people. And yet there was room for a number three player. I was blessed being in an industry that only had one dominant player. When I started competing with H&R Block in 1982, they had 9,000 locations, and the second largest had 200. it's very obvious to me and should be obvious to everyone that there's a huge void there. There's always a Burger King, right? There's always a number two player in every industry. There's no industry that's dominated by one player. So there was room for a second player. And Jackson Hewitt came along and grew to 6,000 locations. And H&R Block still had 9,000. Today they have about 9,000 in the United States. And Jackson Hewitt grew to 6,000. And then no one had more than 200 in third. So there's always room for a third player. There's always a Wendy's. There's McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's. There's always a Wendy's. So there was an opportunity to create in that particular industry the second largest and the third largest competitors. That doesn't exist in many industries where there's only one or two large national players. So it was in the right place at the right time. And the others did not keep up with the times. And I've always believed that my job as a franchisor is to give you the best system. And to have the best system, it has to be an evolving system. So each of the other two companies that I was competing with when I was with Liberty Tax, both H&R Block and Jackson Hewitt, the founders had left, me being one of them, of course, and corporate managers, suits came in and took over, and they weren't committed to evolve and improve satisfactorily. They had no entrepreneurship leadership. And so that's what has been catapulted me into being successful at Liberty Tax, and again building a company that became a $500 million public company with over 4,000 locations.
You know, John, one of the problems I'm going to have in this discussion is trying to figure out which of the things to take to which of the directions to take, because you've got so much rich in what you're saying. But one of the things that you said right there was how the suits come in. I call them the MBAs or the the private equity guys. And
Yep.
my wife used to work for a company. I'm not going to mention their name on air because they're a nationally known brand. Everybody listening knows their brand. And I don't want to besmirch them because they were really nice to my wife when I was in the hospital and they thought I was dying. They paid her full time and told her to work half time, and that was lovely. But when I got out of the hospital, she said, "Hey, there's a rumor that private equity guys are taking over." And I said, "Well, if they do, the first thing they're going to do is cut customer service."
Absolutely. That's the mantra is cut costs, save money, and put short-term financial gain ahead of long-term customer service.
Now, I've read your book, I Compete, and it came across that customer service is not just an interest of yours, but it's a passion.
Absolutely. And I have I've evolved over the years. It started out, I started out in the 60s and 70s, customers number one. And then along came the 80s, 90s, more in the 90s, with people like Sam Walton and Herb Kelleher of Southwest Air. And they said, no, no, no. If you want your customers to be treated as number one, you have to treat your employees as number one. And then along came franchising and said, in addition to that, you have to treat your franchisees as number one. So my success has been solely attributable to happy, successful employees, happy, successful franchisees, which creates customers that we specialize in exceeding their expectations.
Well, and I heard an example that you gave in your book, and it was, a customer came in, they were upset, and I think your staff was debating what to do. And for you, the response was immediate: make the customer happy, even if it causes a short-term loss.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. My people, especially in most of my career has been in tax corporations. So most of my stories are related to preparing tax returns. But these two sisters came in back in about 1976. And the average fee back then was about $15 or $20. And one of the sisters had interest income of like $4. Well, that required an extra statement on a tax return. Back then you had to add a statement. And so I was at H&R Block, we added a fee. So one sister's, they both had worked at the same place, had the same approximate W-2, but one had this $4 of interest income. So one tax return was $15 and the other was $17.50. They went home and the sister that called up that paid $17.50 said, I'm upset. Our tax returns are exactly the same. It took exactly the same amount of time to do them. Two different preparers did them. Why was mine $2.50 more? And the office supervisor tried to explain it to her. And the sister didn't buy it. So I said, give her tax return for free. Give her the whole $17.50 for free. And so the office supervisor said, no. Not only will they go out and she's going to tell her sister who call and complain, and she'll want her $15 back, but then they'll tell all their friends. And I said, just do it. And sure enough, there was, they never complained again. They came in for decades later. But not only did I benefit from exceeding a customer's expectation and getting decades of fees from these sisters, and I got referrals, but there was a added benefit that I hadn't thought about, that from then on, when that office supervisor had a problem, she learned quickly that if the customer had a problem, no matter if it was our fault or not, I would always say, I'm sorry there's been that you had a problem. And I would always start out by apologizing, even if the taxpayer was 100% right. And so soon, within a few months and years, she became my favorite officer. No problem got to me. She would solve the problem. She became a problem solver with my philosophy in that office. And she had one of the biggest offices. Little Corning, New York had one of the top 100 biggest offices in the country because of her incredible customer service. And we honor our money back guarantee. Most companies try to argue their way out of it.
Yeah. And so we're recording this in 2024, and there's a lot of debate about, is the economy strong and growing? Is it shrinking? I look at the consumer, and I look at a lot of the people that I talk to, and they're at the very least scared. And I can picture where it would be easy for an organization to say, you know what, this year we're going to cut back on customer service. When the economy turns around, then we'll start investing in customer service then. Do you think that's good advice? What would you advise them do?
Well, first of all, I believe in lifetime value of a customer, not 2024 version of a customer. I believe in the lifetime value of a customer. And my customers tend to stay with me 7 to 10 years on average. And so that's what I'm looking at. I'm not looking to monetize today and lose tomorrow. I'm not willing to take that chance or that gamble. And plus I get all the referrals from every customer is going to, within every 4 or 5 years, going to refer another customer to me. So, and what I've found, Craig, is that in my 54 years of experience, I've been through about 5 or 6 recessions, including the Great Recession. And during recessions, great companies grab more market share than when times are good, because other companies are cutting back on customer service, on hours, and they're missing out on opportunities. So I've grabbed the most market share during recessions. In the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009, Liberty Tax added 700 locations. Starbucks closed 650 locations. So Starbucks was offering less service, even wonderful, great Starbucks, because during a recession, you don't have to buy a cup of coffee, a fancy cup of coffee, but you do have to file your taxes. And so I find that you can never stop exceeding customers' expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, and that focus on lifetime value is one of the things that I find a lot of people miss. They get all caught up in the cost of the first transaction. And one of my personal philosophies, and actually it's not mine, like most, great ideas, I stole it from someone else. I think it was Dan Kennedy that said, whoever's willing to spend the most on customer acquisition wins. And so, but that requires a clear view of lifetime value. So
Yeah, can I give you an example that
yeah,
really portrays this? That my competitors, this is the way my competitors handle it, and this is the way that I handle it. And even my own people fight with me sometimes about it. But if we have a situation where if you file your tax, you can, for an extra fee of $39, you can have your tax return fee withheld from your refund. So you don't pay anything up front. So say the fee is $300, and if you pay up front, it's $300. But if you don't want to pay up front for an extra $39, we'll take the whole $339 out of your refund. And then when it comes in, it'll be $339 less. Well, what happens is about 1% of those returns don't get funded. And so the person owes us $339, right? The IRS holds the refund up. They have back taxes or child support or student loan, and the one of the agencies grabs their refund, and so they don't pay. So it's 10 returns out of 1,000. So let's say that's when this is the way the others think of it, right? They go to their employees and franchisees and say, well, that's accounts receivable. There are 10 customers that owe you $300. That's $339. That's $3,390 of accounts receivable. You need to go collect. And so you send them ladders, and you eventually turn them into a collection agency to get their money. What I explain to my people is, that's going to happen before the season starts. And if you lose one return, for every return you lose, the customer pays $300, but incrementally it didn't cost you $30, right? It didn't cost you $30. So, and in advance, it's sort of like in a grocery chain, when you buy 2,000 pounds of tomatoes, some of them are going to spoil. Think of it as spoilage. It's going to cost you, for those 10 returns, it's going to cost you $300. It's going to cost you $30 times 10, $300. You have to raise your fee 30 cents rather, to pay for that. Raise your fee and don't charge them anything. And how many of those people that you track down and go after and try to get that $339, how many of them are ever going to come back again? And how many of them are going to tell their friends that this is not a place to go? They're evil. I mean, you've lost a customer. You can lose a customer for life, or for 30 cents extra, instead of charging $300 average fee, you charge $300.30 to everyone. You paid for it, and you make those people happy. They'll come back, and you know what? God bless them if they never pay. For the next 8 years, they get free tax returns. It costs you $30 times 8, $240 if they come back 8 straight years. And sooner or later, they're going to have their refunds have going to paid off the debt, and they're going to start paying you. So, but our competitors, they go after those people like they're evil crooks, and they lose them for life.
Yeah, that's so smart. One of the things when we were talking about people cutting during recessions, cutting customer service. One of the biggest gifts I believe that you can be given is to know the playbook of your competition. If you know the playbook of your competition, it gives you so much advantage. And so if you know that they're going to be cutting customer service or they're going to be stopping investment, this is your opportunity to increase your lead on them because you know their playbook. You don't do what they do, compete against it.
Exactly. And some of it is they cut their hours, right? They reduce their hours, they reduce their staffing. And what I've found that during recession, my landlords are more lenient. They'll work with me. My people, I've had people take, they've taken pay cuts or taken less hours voluntarily to save the company, to save their future. So everyone tightens their belt during recession, and your best people will work with you. Your best landlords, your best vendors, everyone will work with you, and in anticipation of a great future. But there's no great future if you're not exceeding customers' expectations.
Yeah. Now, one of the things you said a few minutes ago that really surprised me and kind of ties into that thing of knowing your competitor's playbook. You said that competing against Jackson Hewitt, competing against H&R Block was harder. That surprised me because I thought it would be easier because you know their playbook, you know what they're going to do. What made it harder?
Well, Craig, to succeed, you have to have differentiators, right? If David had gone onto the field with the same sword and the same shield and the same armor as Goliath, there would be no David and Goliath. He'd be the 189th guy killed by Goliath, right? So when I competed with H&R Block, when I started with Jackson Hewitt, I had to have things I did better, right? Things that I did different, whether it's a slingshot or whatever it is, I had to do. If you advertise the same way, have the same hours, pay your preparers the same, if you do everything the same, how are you going to get customers? They're going to get the lion's share of the customer. They have way more money and way more name recognition. So you have to do it different. So now when I started Liberty, I had to be different from not only H&R Block, but my own name and my own software and my own system. So I had to come up with things that were unique, objective, different than they did. And for example, and one was clear that we did. For example, most of your listeners, no doubt, have seen Our Lady Liberty out in front of dancing in front of our office, right? Now, not only are we best in the industry, that there's no one in the industry that had a costume character, but almost no industry. So consumers today are bombarded with thousands of messages every day, online, television, radio, newspaper, direct mail, everything. And if you see a waiver out in front of an office every day from January 1st to April 15th, that's going to catch your mind. No matter everything being bombarded, you can't pass by one without seeing it. And so things like that differentiate us. We had to have differentiators that made us special.
One of the people I talked to about this interview, and I asked him if he had heard of Liberty Tax Service. He was like, and he said it in a negative tone. He was like, "Oh, is that company that has those statues of liberties out on the road?" He's like, I wouldn't do my taxes there. And I said, well, you're probably not their customer.
Exactly. People have to understand that in my industry, for example, H&R Block, household name, 9,000 locations, Fortune 500 company, they only have a 13% market share, right? At Jackson Hewitt and Liberty, I only got to combined about 7% market share. You don't need 100% of the customer, right? You don't need 100% of the customer. You can't get 100% of the customer in any industry, right? There are things at McDonald's that turns consumers off. There are things at Burger King that turn consumer stuff at Wendy's. Every industry, there's no one that has 100% market share, right? Not Macy's, not Walmart, not any company has 100% market share. You have to understand that Jackson Hewitt became a billion-dollar company with only a 6% market share. Only a 6% market share. And H&R Block is a $5 billion company today with only a 13% market share. You don't need 100%. You can't try to please everyone.
So I'm a marketing consultant, and one of the things a lot of my clients are terrified of is offending somebody. They want a message that's so clean and so sanitized that it offends no one. And I say if it offends no one, it probably moves no one. I'm interested in your take on that.
Absolutely. There's over the years, an ad had to be incredibly good, and which is hard, or incredibly bad. I mean, there are bad ads that gave people help companies grab incredible market share. Yeah, I mean, they say any publicity is good publicity. At the end of the day, you need to have brand recognition, and a bad ad or a bad message can do that. I mean, I loved. I'm not sure this, and I love that lady at Wendy's. Where's the beef? Where's the beef? Right? I love, what propelled Heinz to become #1 in ketchup. You're not old enough, but they had a bottle back in the 60s, and they just showed how fast the ketchup came out of a competitor's bottle and their bottle. And it took a lot longer out of the Heinz bottle. So that just showed, that simple message showed the consumer that it was thicker and therefore, in their minds, higher quality, better tasting. And so, yeah, there was, what was the phrase? Something about Pepsodent. Wonder where the yellow went when you brush your teeth with Pepsodent. I mean, that was their big ad in the 60s, and they grabbed huge market share. So over the years, there's been a lot of weird stuff that has worked well. Your job, first of all, you got to get branding. And there are thousands, and how many in every area in Virginia Beach, how many companies are there that are fighting for market share? So let's think of it this way, Craig, that in Virginia Beach, there's 550,000 people. There's about 10% businesses in this country per population. So that means there's 55,000 business. If there's 550,000 people in Virginia Beach, there's 55,000 people trying to get brand name. Bad is good. You have to first, before you can get a customer, you got to get them to recognize your brand, right? Then you have to make two decisions, right? You have to recognize your brand and what you do, and then you have to believe that it's a good return on investment, whatever it is. Whether you're a realtor, whether you're selling groceries, first of all, you have to get brand name, and then you have to get a decision. Yet, I'm going to give that brand a try. But most people, if you don't want to risk stepping on toes, it's easier to get brand name by stepping on toes than it is by going along with what everyone else does.
Yeah. Well, and something I tell clients when they say that's not how it's done in my industry, my next question to them is your goal to be average?
Right. If there's 20 competitors in my market, do you want to advertise the same way as the other 19? That's stupid. That's crazy.
Yeah. So there's one thing that I think's probably lost. As I'm listening to you talk about this, you've laid out how you've built these two big brands, and now you have loyalty brands, which is even more brands, and you're repeating the formula that you've used before. There are people that would easily think, well, this was just a easy process. You went off and started, went from H.R. Block to starting Jackson Hewitt. But in reading your book, it struck me as anything but easy.
Well, it was easy. Anyone could do it. I mean, if you just think about the tax industry, right? Income tax, and which I've been doing since 1969. This is my 55th tax. Uh, I've seen hundreds of competitors try to go national against H&R Block. There's only one guy that's ever done that. And I've done it twice. So in the whole industry, there's been millions of taxpayers, hundreds try to go national. There's only two guys that did it, Henry Block and John Hewitt. And, everything worthwhile requires hard work. The one thing I admit in my book is all the mistakes, or many of the mistakes I made, my biggest mistakes. And you get to learn from my mistakes. I think I do, based on the feedback I get from people that read my book. The number one compliment I get is, I like the way you laid out the errors you made. And the people that are most successful have made the most errors. In this industry, I've either made every mistake you can possibly make or seen every mistake you could possibly make. So I'm an expert on error. And I take the, out of trial and error, there's no error when you get our system. Right? You don't have to go through trial. You don't have to go through error. We've already done that for you. You get the best system on the planet because of all the errors I've made.
And just for clarity, what you're talking about, loyalty brands, you've taken what you've learned over these years and you're helping other brands go off and franchise.
Exactly. We have 8 different franchise systems. And of course, our tax division is again, the fastest growing in that space. Just like I was when I was with Block and Jackson, Hewitt, and Liberty. Once again, we're the fastest growing. They give it to me by default by not measuring up to my consumer values and our consumer values.
Yeah. Well, speaking of values, I want to pivot a little bit. And you talk about priorities in your book. And you said that there's an order. You have an order of decisions where you make priorities. What is that order?
Well, it's pretty simple. My 2 primary priorities are that in order to have a structure, you have to have policies and procedures. In order to have a great organization, you have to have principles. And so the order is very simple, though, that when you have principles and policies, you always, principle trumps policy. So you always have to do the right thing for the consumer, even though if you have some policy. I hate companies when I go into a company that has some policy. For example, one policy that I hate routinely is when I go into a restaurant and let's say I'm having a party of 6 people. And usually, since I'm traveling all the time, I'm out of the area and I'm meeting 3 or 4 groups. And so I go into a restaurant and I have a table for 6 at 6 o'clock. I arrive at 5:30 and you're the first one here. Some restaurants won't see you. You have to go sit at the bar or sit in the corner over there because either till all your parties here or most of your parties here. Some of them have all your party. Now, if I have 6 people coming, we may be waiting, 5 of us may be waiting for one person. That this is business, right? They may be a half hour late. It's just, I hate that policy. That's not principled. That's not treating customers right. So one thing that's clear priority is principles trump policy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I like that because when you have well-defined, clear principles, it makes decision-making easy. It's a framework through which you can make any decision you need to make.
Exactly. You don't need to worry about violating a policy.
Yeah.
Like come opening early or staying late or that's just the policy. But the principle is doing what's right for the customer. And we have a policy. We don't deliver tax free. Well, I'm certain there's some situations where it's a imminent disaster that someone needs a tax return, then we got to go deliver it back. And that's principle, doing what's best for the customer.
I also read in your book, you said when you're setting priorities, your first priority is God, then it's family, and then it's the business. How, what's that look like and how that plays out?
Well, again, that you always have to do the right thing. You always have to. It's and it's. Let me say, Craig, that being principled is very, very difficult. That, and I didn't realize that until I had an epiphany 35 years ago. I was in church, and the minister said, "Every one of us sins every day." And I said to myself, "Wow, I get that I do, but he's admitting that he does." And so my first takeaway was, okay, if he says everyone, I agree with it. And then a couple months later, it dawned on me, and I had an epiphany that, wow, if we're going to violate God's 10 commandments, we're certainly going to violate that was when I was with Jackson Hewitt, Jackson Hewitt's 10 principles. And so what I did is I created we call them mission moments. And so we gave every employee a pad of mission moments. And what it was is it had a room for their name, and it had the 10 principles of Jackson Hewitt. And then below it was a comment. And if you saw someone that did a good job of meeting the principle and overcoming a policy, then you would tear it off, write their name, and give a comment. And then, but if you saw someone violate a principle and treat someone with disrespect or do something, then you would give them that. And it was fun to see that all over the headquarters, that people would post them on their wall. Most people only got good ones because no one liked to give bad ones. I mean, I enjoyed giving bad ones because I'm very frank, brutally frank. And when someone doesn't live up to it, then especially one of my officers, even that caused lots of arguments, and they try to defend their behavior. But I love it when I walked around the office and saw people had them taped to their wall, and it made it a better place to work. And it made for have them help me, because if you're going to violate God's principles, you're going to violate your company's principles. And so and you have to, you can never stop that, right? God hasn't been able to stop it, so no company's going to be able to stop it. But you can be cognizant of it and try to improve. And while I didn't do that in my family, we certainly have had challenges in my family and in business where people were unprincipled.
Yeah. Such an interesting way of looking at it. The other thing that I learned about you is you started your own charity, and initially you started by looking for another charity, and your passion is about addressing hunger. And you found charities that addressed hunger, but as a part of it, I believe the words you used, they were proselytizing. And that was something that was not what you wanted as part of your charitable givings. And I just have to be honest, that surprised me when I read that. Can you help me understand your thinking there?
Yeah, when one of our principals at Liberty and at Jackson Hewitt and now at Loyalty Brands is to give back. And as I began to get wealthy, when I was building Jackson Hewitt into a $1 billion company, I felt called to help in world hunger. And because back then, I think 38,000 people a day were dying of starvation or disease and related to starvation. And somehow that struck my heart. Now, there are hundreds of great causes, including proselytizing to those people that you save their lives. So I went on a search to try to find, my goal was just to save local lives. And what I found is every organization that in the United States that was into hunger was also, after you saved their life, you would proselytize, you would teach them about Christ, or you would teach them or You would teach them how to farm or fish or manufacture. You would teach them so that they wouldn't get it back into that same situation. Well, the problem, and both of those are important, right? Teaching them to be self-sustaining and teaching them about Christ are very important. But meantime, there's people dying over there. So let's say it cost me, I invested 100,000 and saves 1,000 lives, and then another 100,000 to either to proselytize and teach them to be self-sustaining. Well, meantime, there's people dying right next door. I mean, over there, there's hundreds of thousands of people dying, thousands of people every day. So I felt compelled to just save lives and turn them over to other organizations. So I started my own organization in same year I started Liberty in January of '98. And all we did was focus on saving lives. And then we partnered with other organizations that like church organizations and other charitable organizations that wanted to do the other things. It's not that they aren't important. They're is incredibly important. But my heart tugs out for the people that are starving.
Yeah.
And so we're like the Marine. I've never been in the armed forces, but I view it as sort of the way that I see the Marines are when they go in and take over Iwo Jima, the Marines are the first on shore. And then they turn it over to the army, right? And I view it so there was no other organization doing that. So we had an organization called Stop Hunger Now. Our mission statement was the name of our organization. Stop Hunger Now started in January '98. And I'm proud to say that I partnered with a Methodist minister. He did all the work, went all over the world. For the first 2.5 years, I paid all the expenses and food and transportation. But now they have 100 employees and distribute over 500 million meals in 76 different countries.
Yeah. That's incredible. That is absolutely incredible. I don't know if you realize it, but I was in the Marines, spent 6
I
years.
didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't. When I was saying that, I was wondering if you had ever been in the armed forces.
Yeah, I spent 6 years in the Marine Corps.
Am
And
I right the way that I think of it?
yeah, no,
Marines are
it's
the first guys there.
first guys there. And you probably don't know, when I was, I mentioned earlier, I was in the hospital and I had to, when I got out of the hospital, I had to learn how to walk again. And, my body completely atrophied. And I credit the Marine Corps for giving me the mentality to go through the difficult path of recovery. But kind of tying it back to our conversation here, the conversation about branding. You want to talk about a well-branded organization, it's the Marine Corps, and they defend their brand vigorously.
Yeah, I think that there's an air of elite comradeship, and that may not exist in the Army or the Navy.
Yeah. 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 No, and we take care of our own. When I was in a coma, there's a Marine that lives down the street because once a Marine, always a Marine. And he showed up at my house and started cutting the grass without being asked.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to get in trouble with Army and Navy members, by the way, for having said that. But it seems to me they carry themselves a little bit more elite than and that's maybe because there's less of them. And or again, what's Semper Fi? Is that what it's called?
Always
Semper?
faithful.
Yeah,
Always faithful.
right. Never leave a soldier behind. Or I mean, there's an aura about a Marine, I think, that in my mind. And I'm sure if I was in the Army, I would think Army was best. If I was in the Navy, I would think Navy was best. I've always, my name of my book is I Compete. So if I was with any one of them, I would think I was best.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, what advice would you give to business owners in 2024 as they're facing whatever you believe about today's economy? What advice would you give as we sign off today?
Well, I learned, I'm a constant learner, and I mentioned at least 3 to, if not 6 times on this podcast, that exceeding customers' expectation. But I'll say it this way, that we do something. This is the way I think of it, that I learned from an author called Stan Phelps. And in this book, he said, when you arrive at an event, no one say the event's at 9 a.m. No one arrives exactly at 9 a.m. They are there before or after. I mean, it's rare that someone walks in, this clock strikes 9, and the very second, and someone walks in the door. And he said, in the very same manner, you rarely meet a customer's expectation. You either fail to meet it or you exceed it. And so my message is that we measure our success on exceeding a greater percentage of customers' expectation. We can never be 100% for many, many reasons. But every year we evaluate our performance, and have we exceeded a greater percentage of customers' expectation? And so if you do that, if you exceed a greater share of customers' expectations every year, you're going to be wildly successful. If you don't, you're going to be somewhere between mediocre and failing.
I like that. And it's not exceeding everybody's expectation, because that's impossible, but exceeding more expectations than any of your competitors. And I think that's so key. When you look at top performers, the difference between number 1 and number 50 is often small. If you look in sports or what have you, small differences, but those small differences make a big, big difference.
Yeah, the difference between ordinary, I love the phrase, difference between extraordinary and ordinary is the little extra. And that's why they call it extraordinary. And I love the phrase that, they talk about the extra mile, that there's very little traffic on the extra mile.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, this has been just a delightful conversation. And one of the goals before we hit record was, you said your goal is to improve people's lives or change lives. So, kind of, what would be your parting shot of how to change people's lives, and how would they reach you if they want to be a part of that mission?
Well, the one thing that's been the secret sauce of my success is I've always wanted what's better for the other person. And whether it's an employee, a customer, a franchisee, a vendor, if it's best for them, I want what's best for them. When it's best for me, wow, that's joyful. But if you're an employee and you get a chance at somewhere else and season your life's dream, go for it. I mean, I want you to be all that you can be. And so that is the key thing that's propelled me through all my successes. I always want what's best for the other person. And part of that is you have to then care and find out, right? Because people aren't just going to vomit, oh, this is what's best for me. You need to listen to them and work with them and nourish them and encourage them to find out what is best for them. So that's the key to my success. But the way to reach me is John, J-O-H-N, at loyaltybrands.com. Glad to send you a free book if you reach out to me.
Well, that's a generous offer, John. I do hope people reach out, and thank you for sharing your powerful story today on Leaders and Legacies.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Craig. Have a wonderful day.
This is Craig Andrews. I want to thank you for listening to the Leaders and Legacies podcast. We're looking for leaders to share how they're making an impact beyond themselves. If that's you, please go to alliesforme.com/guest and sign up there. If you got something out of this interview, we would love you to share this episode on social media. Just do a quick screenshot with your phone and text it to a friend or post it on the socials. If you know someone who would be a great guest, Tag them on social media and let them know about the show, including the hashtag Leaders and Legacies. I love seeing your posts and suggestions. We are regularly putting out new episodes and content. To make sure you don't miss anything, please go ahead and subscribe. Your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show, and it means a lot to me. It means a lot to my team. If you want to know more, please go to alliesforme.com or follow me on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.